Imagine every DM you've ever sent, every heart you've ever put on some Instagram baddie's story, every grinder swipe you've ever done, every weird little message you've sent to your friend, everything you've ever said to your coworker over text, everything you've ever sent is dumped in a database. And that database is very well structured. There's some like AI summary engine, so you can search it really easily. And there's a link to that database. And I walk you into a room, I sit you down, and I say, okay, we have this link, this searchable database. I'm gonna send that to your mom, I'm gonna send that to your in-laws, I'm gonna send that to your pastor, I'm gonna send that to your church, I'm gonna send that to everyone at your company, including your boss and your board. I'm gonna send that to your little sister. I'm gonna send that to your crush. I'm gonna send that to your husband. I'm gonna send that to your hookup at the park last week. Whatever it was, it's going out in that email, and they can all click on that and they can search everything. They can search their name, they can search everything you've ever said. What would you be willing to do to prevent that being sent? We all have something to hide. Yeah. We all have the right to private communication. For hundreds of thousands of years, that was the norm. We talk. It's gone, right? But somehow over the last 30 or so years, we seem to have walked into a world in which sensors and surveillance and the tracking of every movement, every inclination, every purchase, every relationship we have, every message we send, every thought we type out and erase by a handful of firms is considered the norm. And defaulting to what for centuries has been how it was to private communication is seen as aberrant. We need a different ecosystem within which to build our core technical infrastructure. We can build iconic, cool things that don't, compromise our integrity, that allow us to close our eyes at night and have a peaceful consciousness. It is possible. People want it. They are hungry for it. So that's a good start.
Meredith Whittaker is oprichter van berichtenapp Signal, dat zich verzet tegen het idee dat privacy alleen iets is voor mensen die iets te verbergen hebben. Waarom geven we een handvol bedrijven zoveel macht over onze persoonlijke gegevens? Privacy is volgens haar geen luxe, maar een mensenrecht. En daarom moet de infrastructuur helemaal op de schop.
Los Angeles, hold for conference. Special agents in charge in San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, on the wire.
It's been understood that sort of communication networks form a type of natural monopoly. The post office, the telegraph, telephone services were kind of managed as state-run monopolies because they, the network effect, the economies of scale needed to run a communication network, the sort of centralizing nature of standardization, the fact that you don't want 25 telephones on your wall, each one dedicated to a different group of friends, and you have to remember which is which. All of that means, they're sort of the form of the communication networks is a natural monopoly. That was pretty well understood. Then you get to sort of the early 90s, and there's a history here. You have neoliberalism is ascendant, and then you have the growth of databases, the advent of personal computers, so sort of computing as a personal consumer commodity is growing up, let's say. And ultimately, two key choices were made around how the internet was privatized in the 90s. And this is, came out of the US. And these are what I've called kind of the original sins of the 90s, to be dramatic about it. One is that there are no restrictions on surveillance, so no privacy law. And the second, which is really important here, is that the ad-supported business model was what was sort of designated for the commercial internet. And this is important because, know your customer incentivizes gathering more and more and more data. So you have a kind of flywheel effect where there's no restrictions on private industry for surveillance, and you actually have an incentive to surveil more and more and more and more. And that, set the tone for the industry that emerged with significant state support. A lot of soft power was expended making sure that US firms, US standards, US technology dominated globally. Because again, this is a network. You want everyone using the same thing and you want to control that thing. I mean, I think what I am describing is not that there was some conspiratorial master plan behind the scenes, but simply that none of this was inevitable. The advertising business model was not inevitable. It was pushed by the advertising industry on the one hand, who didn't want to lose another platform. So they had, magazines, newspapers, TV. They're like, well, if there's a new thing, we want in on that as well. And in some cases by the tech industry as well, because that was seen as sort of better than kind of public control and accountability. But even at the time these decisions were being made, there were reports from inside the government, there were reports from civil society and researchers outside warning about the dangers, the constitutional dangers of, not having clear privacy safeguards, some of the issues around ad-supported model, none of which were sort of picked up as these rules were written and put in place.
At no time in the past has our government known so much about so many of its individual citizens. Government bureaucracies seem to thrive on collecting additional information. Data banks affect nearly every man, woman, and child in the United States today. Here is the heart of the matter. A system that fails to respect its citizens' right to privacy fails to respect the citizens themselves. Adequate safeguards must always stand watch so that man remains the master and never becomes the victim of the computer.
She runs, and I quote her, the coolest tech company in the world, and I doubt there are any presidents cooler than she is. Please welcome Meredith Whittaker.
Whittaker is inmiddels een van de meest invloedrijke stemmen in de techwereld. Maar informatie over haar privéleven heeft niemand.
I don't talk about my life publicly because I don't want to. My God, why is it important that I share personal details about who I am and where I come from and who my people are and what I like and what my consciousness does when I shut my eyelids in the dark? That's me. That's not my public image. And I think it is strange that it has become an expectation that we somehow bear some of our personal lives, that we need to become influencers and brands. Those are the kind of personal details that are used to authenticate logins, that are used to authenticate identity, that can be used by people wanting to infiltrate your privacy, to undermine your finances, or hack into this. I don't think anyone should be giving that information out as sort of a fact for people to read online. The tech economy, the economic engine of the industry, is built around the monetization of data. So it's not a privacy-preserving paradigm. It is quite the opposite. You collect data, you use it to create models of types of people that you sell advertisers access to. That's sort of the platform ad-supported social media model or search or what have you. Or you use that data to train an AI model that you integrate into your platform, or you license through an API on your cloud server, et cetera, et cetera. That's the business model. Signal is the opposite, right? We aim to collect as close to no data as possible. We go about rewriting key components of the stack so that we can do things privately that most people would just plug and play to do in a data collecting way, a privacy undermining way, a surveillant way. And so you can imagine if we were a for-profit, we'd have a board. Some guy on my board would go to Davos, get really excited about AI agents, come back to the board meeting talking loud, saying, we need an agentic strategy. What's our agentic strategy? And I would have to deal with that. And then I had an investor, maybe a really like young VC who's like, what's your growth? What's your growth? Well, I think we need to carve out Signal for Business. We need to make sure that Signal for Business at least has this data because we got to understand the market, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You got to be compliant. And so we would have the pressures of an economic model that assumes that growth and revenue comes from data collection applied to a communications platform that is dedicated to collecting no data. So that doesn't work. Now, a nonprofit is not itself a virtuous form. It doesn't mean, it's a tax structure. It's very annoying to fit inside that tax structure when we are, a mass platform, when we have to look and feel and act and move like a large tech company in many, many ways, because that's how we get Signal done. That's how we maintain it. That's how we ensure availability 24/7. But it's one of the ways that we have been able to protect the single focus that we have, ensure that the right to private communication remains even in an age where mass surveillance has become the norm. We are open source. You can validate that the claims I make around Signal's encryption, around our privacy guarantees, around the architecture of our system are actually borne out at the level of code. We're very small. We're very lean. We have a DIY spirit. And I'm not the only one, thankfully. There are, about 50 people at Signal. Most of those people are core engineers, building our applications, maintaining our server libraries, maintaining our core libraries, making sure the product works every day, that the heart keeps beating. It's not cheap. It's about $50 million a year to run Signal. And everyone in tech who's hearing that is like, wow, you're lean. And everyone in philanthropy is like, oh my God, that's so much money. So we are dealing with, sort of different paradigms in terms of what it means to run an organization. But yeah, it is possible. I would say the industry engages in a lot of privacy washing, for sure. I mean, it's, you can have something that is labeled gold, but is 10% gold and 90% lead. And you can have something that's pure gold, and both use the term gold. And so it, of course, breaks down on the specifics. It breaks down on how is this implemented? What do you mean by privacy? Private from whom? Where is encryption applied? And where is it not applied? In the case of, say, WhatsApp, they are a mix of gold and lead. They use gold, which is our Signal encryption protocol, which is the standard in the industry. It's the best. And they use it only in one place, however. They only encrypt the contents of messages, the what you say. But the lead is everything else. They don't encrypt metadata. They don't encrypt your contact list. They don't encrypt your group's information, your profile photo, your profile name. When did you start talking to an oncologist? When did you start talking to a therapist? When did you start having an affair? When did you start organizing a union at your work? All of these things are available implicitly through that metadata. And then, of course, they're owned by the company Meta, so that data can then be joined with bigger data profiles, data from data brokers, et cetera, creating a very powerful profile. Signal encrypts everything we can, even from ourselves.
Als metadata nu al zoveel prijs geeft over ons leven, wat gebeurt er dan als overheden aandringen op verdere verzwakking van die bescherming? Onder termen als toegang, veiligheid en uitzonderingen schuilt in feite steeds dezelfde eis: een backdoor. Oftewel, een achterdeurtje naar onze privécommunicatie.
We live in a world in which computational technology, networked computation, comprises the nervous system of our economies, our institutions, our governments, et cetera. The list of things that it doesn't touch is much shorter than the list of things it does. And so that's not going away in any foreseeable future.
Terwijl Meta bij het Witte Huis de voordeur plat loopt, willen overheden dat Signal de achterdeur openzet om toegang te krijgen tot data. Omdat ze naar eigen zeggen alleen zo de bad guys kunnen vangen.
There are constant attempts by governments to add a backdoor to Signal. The most recent has been the chat control debate in the EU, in which, with the pretext of protecting children, which I believe is a sincere intention by some, there has been a suggestion that all messages sent over Signal or any other service have to be scanned against a government database of permissible content to detect whether somebody is doing something nefarious. This is, it's technologically unworkable. It would completely undermine the right to private communication, and it would be almost instantly, I am absolutely sure, exploited by hackers and hostile nation states, because you can't have a backdoor that only the good guys can enter. They want to access the content. They want to see what the bad guys are doing. They want to look under the hood and make sure no one's doing bad things in the dark. They want to put a camera in every home, put a camera in every bathroom. The magical thinking is that if the government is looking, nothing bad can happen.
Maar wat als de overheid nou juist die bad guy is die in jouw slaapkamer wil meekijken?
Say Europe moved ahead in a tedious and authoritarian fashion to mandate that we implement a backdoor under their, some version of the chat controls legislation, we would fight it. We would not comply. We would continue not complying. We would set up proxy servers to try to get people access to Signal, even if we were blocked, like we do in Iran or Russia. But ultimately, if it came down to the choice between a backdoor or exiting a market, we would exit the market, because we simply will not sell out the people who rely on us, often in life or death contexts. In Uganda, being queer is punishable by death. So that could matter existentially to you or to anyone. Interracial relationships in the US were illegal. If those who have power over you have all of the intimate information about your thoughts, your relationships, your choices, that can be used very easily to control you. This isn't a they have everything already situation. Yes, there is an encroachment that is very severe and we should be looking at with a great deal of alarm. But that doesn't mean that your choice to use Signal to communicate privately, your choice of better options, somehow doesn't matter. Because those things matter greatly. And we know that, militaries, human rights workers, governments, every boardroom I talk to uses Signal because those are contexts where the confidentiality of communications have very, very high stakes. And so, they may have metadata on other things, but they don't have that. And precision matters here. I think the framing that the problem is that individuals have not made virtuous enough choices and thus are impure, polluted, bad, not worth saving is very insidious. And I would point to the concept of the carbon footprint, which was something invented by the oil and gas industry, in effect to responsibilize individual people for climate harms. So it was your fault for not sorting your recycling. It was your fault for taking a car when it rained instead of biking. It's actually you who is unable to resist your animal urges and make bad choices, and that's the problem with the world, and so maybe it can't be saved. And take the responsibility off an industry that is largely responsible for the larger structural choices. So I think we fall into a trap when we frame privacy as simply a choice people are too lazy or impure or addicted to convenience to make, when we don't understand these systemic issues that make it very, very difficult to shift structural problems simply via individual choice, which is not to say individual choices aren't powerful, but is to say we need to relocate the locus of accountability away from the individual. I think a lot of what we're doing is actually looking at, how do you get away from single points of failure? How do you get away from a monoculture that requires monopoly resources to play? How do we get away from the centralized control that is represented by the handful of firms that control our infrastructures, our information environments, our AI-based decision-making? What do I hope for the future is we build a livable future in which people have access to resources and opportunity. People are able to have full, rich lives. That's a future I want. In order to get to that future, privacy is an absolute necessity.